Don't skip your goddamn abs, fellas. Not every athlete feels like they benefit from direct work for their midsection. Let's just call it core training. You can get into some really annoying semantics with what is core, and it's a waste of fucking time. If you identify that you're one of those athletes where you take a zoomed out look, objectively, hey, my back feels better, or hey, I perform better when I'm doing direct midsection work, once you identify if you're one of those guys, commit to it. Don't play silly mind games and gradually rationalize your way out of it. Commit to it and say, this is something that is important for me, right? Don't go back and forth and back and forth. If you, through your own analysis, have found it's important for you, don't skip your fucking abs, boys. You can give me a bunch of really good articulate reasons why gradually you phase them out, which is all good and dandy. But if you find it works for you, you got to kind of just get that set in stone in your head and do your analysis in other areas of your training, right? At some point, we just need to decide something works for us and plug in work for an extended period. And then down the road, we can reevaluate if that's something that still needs to be done. But that being said, we can't be reanalyzing every bit of thing, every little thing we do in training every single week, because we have limited mental resources probably, and we need to allocate those resources towards executing the plan as best we can, being a good athlete. It's not constantly asking the question, should I be doing these? It's thinking about getting it done. It's the same reason a lot of people struggle to coach and be an athlete for themselves, because the more resources you spend asking, should I be doing this, the less resources you can commit to, like as if you had a coach. Coach says, I got to do this. My job is to figure out how to get that done. His question and his mental resources goes whether we should be doing it. But if you're self-coaching like I do, you sometimes just got to hunker down and stop overanalyzing things once we kind of draw that initial conclusion. So long story short, don't skip your fucking abs. Some high performers do abs, some don't. Some people find that all their compound lifting is plenty of work for their midsection to be strong. That's super valid. There's guys stronger than me that have concluded that, and there's also guys stronger than me that have concluded their training goes better with midsection work. I'm part of the latter. Okay. All right, couple of things before we hit the last warm-up here in the no knee sleeves, no belt, banded fucking SSB. We're getting real conjugate out here. We could talk about a little bit of why specifically that's the variation for the day, or I guess this day for the whole training cycle, right? It's not rotating every week. But a couple of things. One, definitely regretting not insulating the garage a little bit quicker. We're supposed to get down to negative 35 Fahrenheit where I live here in Montana tomorrow, which for the rest of the world is negative 37 Celsius. So it's a little bit brisk in here. But we got 3 layers of hoodies and sweats on, and honestly, I'm feeling pretty good. Might actually crack off one of those and go down to 2 here pretty soon. Aside from that, you guys are going to hear me talking a lot about once you come up with a plan, getting your grubby little hands off of it and just focusing on executing it to the best of your ability. Because I think that's a common problem among all of us who love consuming lifting information, to have so many different methods that are all individually valid but rotate between them so often we don't really derive the benefits of any of them. But B, because it's something that I have to constantly remind myself of as someone who coaches himself to see success, which is, a great plan that's rotated every 2 weeks tends to be horribly outperformed by even a shoddy plan that's executed with intensity. And then after that shoddy plan is executed with intensity for a prolonged period, the gaps in that plan become very clear. And then doing these like more spaced out introspective changes and then running another 10 weeks and seeing how that goes. Make small changes. You don't need to do something brand new. It's small changes every 10 weeks. Obviously, there's tons of interesting discussion we can have, and all that's valid. I don't want to be some like anti-intellectual goober that's just telling you hit your 5s. But that being said, there's a reason a lot of the guys that self-coach successfully within the lifting world kind of have some dogmatic views. It's that the dogmatic views, while not necessarily correct, serve a function of stopping them from constantly fiddling with shit too much. So I try to get a little dogmatic in my own head. Obviously, as a coach, as someone who makes videos, I can probably articulate why that's not a one-size-fits-all. But when I'm in my sessions, I kind of tell myself like it is. I tell myself like I have a coach. Coach says this is fucking important. That's just how it is. That's how training works. You got to do your sit-ups, which is why you hear some guys be like, it's not negotiable. You have to do this. And it's like, well, what about all those other guys? They're not thinking about those other guys. They're thinking about getting their work done and just trying to see week-to-week improvement, block-to-block improvement for themselves. We got one last warm-up here on these banded pause squats on the SSB. I wish these were just nice old pretty straight bar squats, but we're doing what we got to do. Then we got our top set where I'm taking, it is 455 for reps. Not that heavy. I got these off-brand doubled up mini bands, which they feel hefty. I don't know what brand I got, but they feel proper heavy doubled up like this. Don't know what the weight is, don't really care. Just trying to see progress on this variation across the training cycle, as it's something that has yielded me success in the past. Let's get after it. All right, time to get fired up for a little top set here. I would like to take this for 7, 455 for 7, even without a belt, even without knee sleeves, and even with the bands. Not all that impressive, I get it, but I've made it up in my mind. We are going to hit a pretty big squat PR this year. I think the squat is a really good tool for just whole body strength and should not be neglected by strongmen, even if it's not something we can test very often. It correlates well with so many events that I think it's a decent use of training economy to want to get my squat up. And B, my squat's getting a little bit embarrassing. Those of you that don't know, my best deadlift is 835. That's with a hitch. My best pull without a hitch, probably I think I've done 820. Obviously, the title of the series is Road to 880, and I intend to improve upon a lot of these numbers. But my best bench press is 600. Many of you know me from that series. My best overhead press is 375 with a good bit of layback, and about 350 without a good bit of layback. But my best squat is only 725. I know that's only in quotations, right? It's all relative. But for me, that's starting to get a little bit embarrassing. Max is pulling ahead of me a little bit. Now, that was done on an SSB, and generally speaking, I can beat my best SSB numbers on a straight bar without too much practice, but then I have to deal with a little bit of bicep tendonitis that I don't really like dealing with. So we'll probably just look to increase the squat on the SSB, but I would very much like to get towards like an 8-plate squat this year, so 765. That'd be 785 on this SSB because it's 20 pounds over. But I'm starting to get a little bit embarrassed about it. So I'm getting fired up. I got some plans. I feel very confident that if I execute those plans, I will be hitting some squat PRs, and it'll help with my deadlift. Every time my squat has gone up, my deadlift tends to follow suit, so long as I'm doing specific other work. One time I really specialized into the squat while not doing all that assistance work that kind of is required to keep the deadlift up to par with the squat, and my deadlift went down a little bit, which was kind of the intent. It was back when I was chasing my first 700 squat. But as long as I'm doing my homework on these other movements, when the squat goes up, the deadlift tends to follow. So it should only help with this road to 880, but it's kind of an independent goal right now. I want to get a squat that I'm a little bit more proud of. It's been a while since I felt like I was a good squatter. And I want some big old wheels. So we're going to get after it on this set. My goal is 7. I think I can do a good 7 with at least 1 to 2 reps in reserve. Quality pauses. Let's get after it. All right, 6 reps, not bad. 1 shy of kind of what I hoped, but still very much a number I can be happy with, especially given at this point in my training cycle, how I organize my training. It is very, very much normal to still be kind of under some fatigue. Some lifters will space out. Well, I only will squat once every 8 days. Because that's how long it takes me to recover and come into a new squat session fresh, whereas other lifters might organize their week in such a way where they got like a primary day, a tertiary day, a secondary day, and it's a given that you're always under a fatigued condition for a lot of these days. I like training under fatigue, and training with a slightly higher frequency model. It's kind of what I like to do. So my legs are still a little bit shot for my primary squat day where I do more total working volume, more assistance work relative to the squat. And I'll take 6, really not bad. Nothing to write home about, not very cool. Can't really brag, unless I tell you guys these bands are 700 pounds. Nothing too cool. A little bit better. One of the big things I'm working on with my SSB is I'm arching into the bar, just a little bit too much in my negative, rather than flexing my abs the way I know is better, and kind of creating my midsection tightness in a little bit different way than what I've been doing. Rather than trying to squat in this extended posture. Did an okay job there, but I still got a ways to go. We're gonna do our second set of these, it's like halfway between a crunch and a sit-up. It's just an ab exercise Max and I have been digging. I do them as a floater exercise. I think I mentioned that in another one. I got 3 sets for the day, 1 before the squats, 1 before the deadlifts, 1 before the assistance work. That way it's kind of spaced out. Just kind of something I like to do. We're gonna get that done, and we will be moving on to the pulls. All right, one thing that I do like to do is just a little bit of I'm just gonna call it movement prep. Just a short list of things. I've got a list of things I like to do before I overhead press, a list of things I like to do before I bench press, deadlift, squat, very specific to the individual. And this idea of movement prep can maybe be a little bit of a slippery slope to get back towards when I was maybe 16 and newer to lifting. Like Kelly Starrett stuff was all over the place, and everybody would spend like an hour mobilizing and flossing before they started training. And this idea that you had to do this really extensive amount of work before you train, or you're inevitably going to get fucked up. And it took away from a lot of people's time in the gym being the actual things that make them better, right? People were spending more time foam rolling than actually doing sets. Now, so that being said, I think it's very good, this narrative that people are putting out there. Hopefully you guys will still be able to hear me. I'm going to go get my shoes that I pull in. But people were putting it out there that like, hey, the best way to get ready for any movement is to do that movement to a low scale. Repeat maybe the bar a couple times, then work your way up. Like this idea of specificity of warm-ups. And I'd say this is absolutely a huge net positive. But as lifters get more advanced, especially if we're talking about larger athletes, moving larger absolute loads, they might have very few working sets per week. So little things that you can do that might proprioceptively help them do a better job with those things becomes slightly more important. Strongman coach Shane German, who's kind of taken over the world right now, is huge at doing all these little movement prep things. And I don't think they necessarily always scale to the general population. But I've got a couple of things I like to do because, hey, it takes me less than 5 minutes. I'd like my movement preps to be short, but I'd make a short list of, hey, if I do this, I can find spreading the floor better on my squat. Or if I do this, this feels better. And then it's just a matter of not being lazy because I've observed these things to help. Couple of things I like to do before I start deadlifting. One, do at least one set of a core exercise, just proprioceptively. It helps me find my brace a little bit better. I'm going to do some rows with one plate. I'm going to do some RDLs with one plate because I've found that doing some kind of hip hinge where we stretch out the hamstrings and doing something to get a little bit of blood flow to the lats helps my deadlifts feel better. And then the last thing I did, which I did off camera, is I always will do like a lunge stretch and stretch out my hip flexors before I deadlift because for some reason I just don't get nearly as much of a lower back pump as long as I do that in my movement prep. So that's my long spiel. Let's start lifting some weights. Okay, so at this point my mic died, so no more talking to the camera after this point. So I figured I would just voice over and keep you guys company for the rest of this. As I mentioned, always just do some rows and some RDLs with the bar and then also with one plate before I get to deadlifting. Rows just because getting a little bit of blood to my lats helps me kind of feel that lat pack in my start position. And then the RDLs mostly because my hamstrings are generally pretty tight starting out the session. I want to be using more of my hip hinge rather than just using my low back as a primary mover. So doing kind of that pure hinge pattern is relatively helpful. I was messing around with the old Martine setup where you're sitting up on your toes. For no reason other than I watched a video of him doing it earlier today. That kind of looks kind of interesting. I'll give her a go on some of my warm-ups and then just go back to my normal setup for my top work for the day. Felt kind of interesting. I see why he does it. Lets you kind of lock in your mid-back a little bit more. And if you're someone who likes to deadlift with a really low start position for the hips, I could really see this being viable. I believe this is my last warm-up at 565 pounds there. With a pause and then took away the pause. Here is 665 pounds for my first pull of the training cycle above 300 kilos. Obviously pretty easy. Not as easy as I would like. The fatigue in my hamstrings was definitely still there from my RDLs earlier in the week. Hamstrings were pretty sauced coming into this session, which is to be expected. So to hit decent numbers, to have the 660, 665 move decent under these fatigue conditions, I'm in all right shape right now, but it's onward and upward from here till I get into good shape. Here is 610 pounds for a set of 6 as my back off set. Nowhere near a PR or anything like that, but decent set for me. And then I elected to do some of these banded good mornings to the pins. The pins are really just there to standardize my depth. I always get in my head whenever I do good mornings that the range of motion is not exactly the same each time. So I usually elect to do them to pins. And I was doing these today because I just wanted to practice that kind of core tightness I was mentioning that I lack on my back squats when I use the SSB. That same core tightness definitely plays a role when I deadlift as well. So I figured I would use these. Obviously, this is not too heavy. This is 205 pounds if we don't count the bands, because this is a 65-pound SSB. Not a lot of weight compared to what I'm squatting and deadlifting, but I really wanted to focus on contracting my abs in the way that I'm looking to contract them on my squat, and it made it pretty easy on my low back, pretty easy for my hamstrings, but I did feel like my core was working quite hard to hold that position, which I thought was promising. We'll definitely be keeping those in there in terms of our assistance work. And then as always, just logging my sets of hamstring curls. I've got this hamstring curl machine at my house. It's a little janky. Went and picked it up from some older fella here in Montana that was selling it, but it gets the job done. The resistance curve, a little wacky, but honestly, it's pretty workable for like a cheap home gym machine. Almost sent it over the top there, but put in 2 work sets here. Just kind of one of the things, just like how I always log a few sets of tricep isolation whenever I do my pressing work, I always log a few sets of hamstring curls anytime I do my deadlifting work. I don't expect like any direct carryover, but I think of it as a long-term investment. Bigger hamstrings, bigger triceps tend to facilitate successful future training cycles on the deadlift and on the bench. So just kind of logging my sets here like I always do. Definitely something that I kind of take pride in always doing. I don't skip my hamstrings. And then before I got out of there, I realized I had one more set of abs, but I had already put away the dumbbells for those crunches, so I decided to just do a quick triple on the standing ab rollout to be my 3rd work set of abs that I forgot to do before my assistance work. Appreciate you boys for watching as always.